Hello and welcome back to Scholastically Natalie, where we talk about books, writing, reading, D&D, and sometimes other things. Sorry, I thought I put my mic in a good spot, and then I realized I did not, so you got moved slightly. Um, Hi. I finally hung up like four things that have just been sitting around my apartment waiting to get hung up, so I'm feeling a little smug about that. Um, None of them are lined up with anything, though, so if you're one of my friends listening to this, don't worry about it, it's fine. um, there might be pausing for drinking. I've been a little coffee today once I got home. But today we will finally go with part 3. And I still somehow managed to mess that up. Oh my god. Why am I like this, guys? It's part 3. The screen's lying to you. Um, I'm finally getting my butt in order to read you a thing. So, without further ado, let us begin. It must have been some imp of the perverse, or some sardonic pull from the dark, hidden sources, which made me change my plans as I did. I had long before resolved to limit my observations to architecture alone, and I was even then hurrying toward the square in an effort to get quick transportation out of this festering city of death and decay. But the sight of old Zadok Allen set up new currents in my mind and made me slacken my pace uncertainly. I had been assured that the old man could do nothing but hint at wild, disjointed, and incredible legends, and I had been warned that the natives made it unsafe to be seen talking to him. Yet the thought of this aged witness to the town's decay, with memories going back to the early days of ships and factories, was a lure that no amount of reason could make me resist. After all, the strangest and maddest of myths are often merely symbols or allegories based upon truth, and old Zadok must have seen everything which went on around Innsmouth for the last 90 years. Curiosity flared up beyond sense and caution, and in my youthful egotism I fancied I might be able to sift a nucleus of real history from the confused, extravagant outpouring I knew would probably extract with the aid of raw whiskey. I knew that I could not accost him then and there, for the firemen would surely notice and object. Instead, I reflected, I would prepare by getting some bootleg liquor at a place where the grocery boy had told me it was plentiful. Then I would loaf near the fire station, in apparent casualness, and fall in with old Zadok after he had started on one of his frequent rambles. The youth said that he was very restless, seldom sitting around the station for more than an hour or two at a time. A quart bottle of whiskey was easily, though not cheaply, obtained in the rear of a dingy variety store just off of the square in Elliott Street. The dirty-looking fellow who waited on me had a touch of the staring Innsmouth look, but was quite civil in his way, being perhaps used to the custom of such convivial strangers, truckmen, gold buyers, and the like, as were occasionally in town. Re-entering the square, I saw that luck was with me, for, shuffling out of Payne Street around the corner of the Gilman house, I glimpsed nothing less than the tall, lean, tattered form of old Zadok Allen himself. In accordance with my plan, I attracted his attention by brandishing my newly purchased bottle, and soon realized that he had begun to shuffle wistfully after me as I turned into Waite Street, on my way to the most deserted region I could think of. I was steering my course by the map the grocery boy had prepared, and was aiming for the wholly abandoned stretch of southern waterfront which I had previously visited. The only people in sight there had been the fishermen on the distant breakwater, and by going a few squares south, I could get beyond the range of these, finding a pair of seats on some abandoned wharf and being free to question old Zadok unobserved for an indefinite time. Before I reached Main Street, I could hear a faint and wheezy haymister behind me, and I presently allowed the old man to catch up and take copious pulls from the quart bottle. I began putting out feelers as we walked along to Water Street, and turned southward amidst the omnipresent desolation and crazily tilted ruins, but found that the aged tongue did not loosen as quickly as I had expected. At length I saw a grass-grown opening toward the sea between crumbling brick walls, with the weedy length of an earth and masonry wharf projecting beyond. Piles of moss-covered stones near the water promised tolerable seats, and the scene was sheltered from all possible view by a ruined warehouse on the north. Here, I thought, was the ideal place for a long, secret colloquy. So I guided my companion down the lane and picked out spots to sit in amongst the mossy stones. The air of death and desertion was ghoulish, and the smell of fish almost insufferable. But I was resolved to let nothing deter me. About 4 hours remained for conversation, if I were to catch the 8 o'clock coach for Arkham, and I began to dole out more liquor to the ancient tippler, meanwhile eating my own frugal lunch. In my donations, I was careful not to overshoot the mark, for I did not wish Zadok's vinous garrulousness to pass into a stupor. After an hour, his furtive taciturnity showed signs of disappearing, but much to my disappointment he still sidetracked my questions about Innsmouth in its shadow-haunted past. He would babble of current topics, revealing a wide acquaintance with newspapers and a great tendency to philosophize in a sententious village fashion. Toward the end of the second hour, I feared my quart of whiskey would not be enough to produce results, and was wondering whether I had better leave old Zadok and go back for more. Just then, however, chance made the opening which my questions had been unable to make, and the wheezing ancient's rambling took a turn that caused me to lean forward and listen alertly. My back was toward the fishy-smelling sea, but he was facing it, and something or other had caused his wandering gaze to light on the low, distant line of Devil Reef, then showing plainly and almost fascinatingly above the waves. The sight seemed to displease him, for he began a series of weak curses which ended in a confidential whisper and a knowing leer. He bent toward me, took a hold of my coat lapel, and hissed out some hints that could not be mistaken. There's where it all began, that cursed place of all wickedness, where the deep water starts. Gate of hell, sheer drop down to a bottom no sounding line can take. Old Captain Obed done it, him that found out more than was good for him in the South Sea Islands. Everybody was in a bad way them days. Trade falling off, mills losing business, even the new ones, and the best of our menfolks killed a privateering in the War of 1812 or lost with the Elysee, bringin' the Ranger Snow, both on them Gilman venters. Obed Marsh he had 3 ships afloat, Brigantine Columby, Brig Hetty, and bark Summitry Queen. He was the only one as kept on with the East India and Pacific trade, though Esdras Martin's barkentine Malay pride made a venture as late as 28. Never was nobody like Captain Obed. Old limb Satan. I can mind him a-tellin' about furrin parts, and callin' all the folks stupid for goin' to Christian meeting and bearing their burdens meek and lowly. Says they ought to get better gods, like some of the folks in the Indies. Gods that would bring 'em good fishing in return for their sacrifices, and would really answer folks' prayers. Matt Elliott, his first mate, talked a lot too, only he was against folks doing any heathen things. Told about an island east of Otaheite, where there were a lot of stone ruins older than anybody knew anything about, kind of like them on Penape in the Carolines, but with carvings of faces that looked like the big statues on Easter Island. There was a little volcanic island near there too, where there was other ruins with different carvings, ruins all worn away like they'd been under the sea once, and with pictures of awful monsters all over them. Well, sir, Matt, he says the natives around there had all the fish they could catch, and sported bracelets and armlets and head rigs made out of a queer kind of gold, and covered with pictures of monsters just like the ones carved over the ruins on the little island. Sort of fish-like frogs or frog-like fishes that was drawn in all kinds of positions like they were human beings. Nobody could get out of them where they got all the stuff, and all the other natives wondered how they managed to find fish in plenty, even when the very next islands had lean pickings. Matt, he got to wondering too, and so did Captain Obed. Obed, he notices besides, that lots of the handsome young folks would drop out of sight for good from year to year, and that there weren't many old folks around. Also, he thinks some of the folks look darned queer even for... I feel like that might be not something not great to say. It took Obed to get the truth out of them heathens. I don't know how he did it, but he began by trading for the gold-like things they wore. Asked them where they came from, and if they could get more, and finally wormed the story out of the old chief. Wallachia, they called him. And nobody but Obed had ever believed the old... Well, that's definitely rude. The old devil, but the captain could read folks like they were books. Is this based off of Wallachia and Castlevania? Heh, nobody believes me now when I tell them, and I don't suppose you will, young fellow. Though come to look at you, you have kinda got them sharp reading eyes like Obed had. The old man's whisper grew fainter, and I found myself shuddering at the terrible and sincere portentousness of his intonation, even though I knew his tale could be nothing but drunken fantasy. Well, sir, Obed, he learnt that there's things on this earth as most folks never heard about, and wouldn't believe if they did hear. It seems these people were sacrificing heaps of their young men and maidens to some kind of god things that lived under the sea, and getting all kinds of favors in return. They met the things on the little islet with the queer ruins, and it seems those awful pictures of frogfish monsters were supposed to be pictures of these things. Maybe they were the kind of critters as got all the mermaid stories and such started. They had all kinds of cities on the sea bottom, and this island was heaved up from that. Seems there was some of the things alive in the stone buildings when the island came up sudden to the surface. That's how the people got wind they were down there. They'd signed talk as soon as they got over being scared, and picked up a bargain before long. Them things liked human sacrifices. Had 'em ages before, but lost track of the upper world after a time. What they did to the victims, it ain't for me to say, and I guess Obed wasn't none too sharp about asking. But it was all right with the heathens, because they'd been having a hard time and were desperate about everything. They gave a certain number of young folks to the sea things twice every year, May Eve and Halloween, regular as could be. Also give some of the carved knickknacks they made. What the things agreed to give 'em in return was plenty of fish. They drove 'em in from all over the sea, and a few gold-like things now and then. Well, as I say, the natives met the things on the little volcanic island, going there in canoes with the sacrifices, etc., and bringing back any of the gold-like jewels as was coming to them. At first, the things didn't ever go on the main island, but after a time they come to want to. Seems they hankered after mixing with the folks and having joint ceremonies on the big days, May Eve and Halloween. You see, they were able to live both in and out of water, what they call amphibians, I guess. The people told 'em as to how folks from the other islands might want to wipe 'em out if they got wind of them being there, but they say they don't care much because they could wipe out the whole brood of humans if they was willing to bother. That is, any as didn't have certain signs as was used once by the old lost ones, whoever they were. But not wanting to bother, they'd lay low when anybody visited the island. When it came to mating with those toad-looking fishies, the people kind of balked, but finally they learned something as put a new face on the matter. Seems that human folks have got a kind of relation to such water beasts, that everything alive came out of the water once, and only needs a little change to go back again. Those things told the people that if they mixed bloods, there'd be children that would look human at first, but later turn more and more like the things, till finally they take to the water and join the main lot of things down there. And this is the important part, young fellow. Them as turned into fish things and went into the water wouldn't ever die. Those things never died except when they were killed violent. Well, sir, it seems by the time Obed knowed those islanders, they were all full of fish blood from those deep water things. When they got old and began to show it, they were kept hidden until they felt like taking to the water and quitting the place. Some were more taked than the others, and some never did change quite enough to take to the water, but mostly they turned out just the way those things said. They were born more like the things changed early, but they were as nearly human sometimes, stayed on the island till they were past 70, though they'd usually go down under for trial trips before that. Folks that took to the water generally came back a good deal to visit, so a man would often be talking to his own 5 times great-grandfather, who'd left the dry land a couple 100 years or so before. Everyone got out of the idea of dying, except in canoe wars with the other islanders, or sacrifices to the sea gods down below, or from snakebite or plague or sharp galloping ailments or something before they could take to the water, but simply looked forward to the kind of change that wasn't a bit horrible after a while. Sorry, my alarm. They thought what they'd gotten was well worth all they'd have to give up, and I guess Obed kind of came to think the same himself when he chewed over old Wallachia story a bit. Wallachia, though, was one of the few that hadn't got none of the fish blood, being of a royal line that intermarried with royal lines on other islands. Wallachia, he showed Obed a lot of the rites and incantations that had to do with the sea things, and let him see how some of the folks in the village had changed a lot from human shape. Somehow or another, though, he would never let him see one of the regular things from right out of the water. In the end, he gave him a funny kind of thingamajig made out of lead or something that he said would bring up the fish things from any place in the water where there might be a nest of them. The idea was to drop it down with the right kind of prayers and such. Wallachia allowed, as the things were scattered all over the world, so anybody that looked about could find a nest and bring him up if they wanted. Matt, he didn't like this business at all, and wanted Obed should keep away from the island, but the captain was sharp for gain, and found he could get them gold-like things so cheap it would pay him to make a specialty of them. Things went on that way for years until Obed got enough of that gold-like stuff to make him start the refinery in Waite's old rundown fulling mill. He didn't dare sell the pieces like they were, for folks would be all the time asking questions. All the same, his crews would get a piece and dispose of it now and then, even though they were swore to keep quiet, and he let his women folks wear some of the pieces that were more human-like than most. Well, come about 38, when I was 7 years old, Obed, he found the island people all wiped out between voyages. Seems the other islanders had gotten wind of what was going on and had taken matters into their own hands. Suppose they must have had, after all, them old magic signs as the sea things say was the only thing they were afraid of. No telling what any of them will chance to get a hold of when the sea bottom throws up some island with ruins older than the deluge. Pious they were. They didn't leave anything standing on either the main island or the little volcanic islet, except what parts of the ruins was too big to knock down. In some places there was little stones strewn about, like charms with something on 'em, like what you would call a swastika nowadays. Probably them was the old one's signs. Folks all wiped out, no trace of the gold-like things, and none of the nearby people would breathe a word about the matter. Wouldn't even admit they'd ever been any people on that island. That naturally hit Obed pretty hard, seeing as his normal trade was doing very poor. It hit the whole of Innsmouth too, because in seafaring days what profited the master of the ship generally profited the crew proportionate. Most of the folks around town took the hard times kind of sheep-like and resigned, but they were in bad shape because the fishin' was petering out and the mills weren't doing none too well. Then's the time Obed, he began cursing at the folks for being dull sheep and praying to a Christian heaven as didn't help them none. He told them he knew of folks that prayed to gods that give something you really need, and says if a good bunch of men would stand by him, he could maybe get a hold of certain powers as would bring plenty of fish and quite a bit of gold. Of course, them that served on the cemetery queen and saw the island know what he meant, and weren't none too anxious to get close to see things like they'd heard tell on, but they didn't know what it was all about, kinda swayed by what Obed had to say, and began to ask him what he could do to set them on the way to the faith as would bring them results. Here the old man faltered, mumbled, and lapsed into a moody and apprehensive silence, glancing nervously over his shoulder, then turning back to stare fascinatedly at the distant black reef. When I spoke to him, he did not answer, so I knew I would have to let him finish the bottle. The insane yarn I was hearing interested me profoundly, for I fancied there was contained within it a sort of crude allegory based upon the strangeness of Innsmouth, and elaborated by an imagination at once creative and full of scraps of exotic legend. Not for a moment did I believe the tale had any really substantial foundation, but nonetheless the account held a hint of genuine terror, if only because it brought in reference to strange jewels clearly akin to the malign tiara I had seen at Newburyport. Perhaps the ornaments had, after all, come from some strange island, and possibly the wild stories were lies of the bygone Obed himself rather than of this antique toper. I handed Zadok the bottle, and he drained it to the last drop. It was curious how he could stand so much whiskey, for not even a trace of the thickness had come into his high, wheezy voice. He licked the nose of the bottle and slipped it into his pocket, then, beginning to nod and whisper softly to himself, I bent close to catch any articulate words he might utter, and thought I saw a sardonic smile behind the stained, bushy whiskers. Yes, he was really forming words, and I could grasp a fair proportion of them. Poor Matt. Matt, he was always against it. Tried to line up the folks on his side and had long talks with the preachers, no use. They run the congregational parson out of town, and the Methodist feller quit. Never did see resolved Babcock the Baptist parson again. Wrath of Jehovah, I was a mighty little critter, but I heard what I heard and seen what I seen. Dagon and Ashtoreth, Belial and Beelzebub, golden calf, and the idols of Canaan, and the Philistines' Babylonish abominations. Mene, mene, tekel, a parson. He stopped again, and from the look in his watery blue eyes, I feared he was close to a stupor after all. But when I gently shook his shoulder, he turned on me with astonishing alertness and snapped out some more obscure phrases. Don't believe me, hey? Then just tell me, young fellow, why Captain Obed and 20-odd other folks used to row out to Devil Reef in the dead of night and chant things so loud you could hear 'em all over town when the wind was right. Tell me that, hey? And tell me why Obed was always dropping heavy things down into the deep water, the other side of the reef where the bottom shoots down like a cliff lower than you can see sound. Tell me what he'd done with that funny-shaped lead thingamajig as Wallachia give him. Hey, boy, and what did they all howl on May Eve, and again the next Halloween? And why do the new church parsons, fellers that used to be sailors, wear them queer robes and cover themselves with gold-like things Obed brung, hey? The watery blue eyes were almost savage and maniacal now, and the dirty white beard bristled electrically. Old Zadok probably saw me shrink back, for he began to cackle evilly. Beginning to see, hey? Maybe you'd like to have been me in those days, where I saw things at night, out to sea from the cupola top of my house. Oh, I can tell you little pitchers have big ears, and I wasn't missing nothing of what was gossiped about Captain Obed and the folks out to the reef. How about the night I took my pa's ship glass up to the cupola and saw the reef a-bristling thick with shapes that dove off quick soon as the moon rose. Obed and the folks were in a dory, but those shapes dove off the far side into the deep water and never came up. How'd you like to be a little shaver alone up in a cupola and watching shapes that weren't human shapes, hey? The old man was getting hysterical, and I began to shiver with a nameless alarm. He laid a gnarled claw on my shoulder, and it seemed to me that its shaking was not altogether that of mirth. Suppose one night you see something heavy heaved off of Obed's dory beyond the reef, and then learned next day a young fellow was missing from home, hey? Did anyone ever see hide or hair of Hiram Gillum again, did they? And Nick Pierce, and Lully Waite, and Adoniram Southwick, and Henry Garrison, hey? Shapes talkin' sign language with their hands, them as had real hands. Well, sir, that was the time Obed began to get on his feet again. Folks see his 3 darters wearing gold-like things as nobody never seen on them before, and smoke started coming out of the refinery chimbley. Other folks were prospering, too. Fish began to swarm into the harbor fit to kill, and heaven knows what sized cargoes we began to ship out to Newburyport, Arkham, and Boston. 'Twas then Obed got the Old Branch Railroad put through. Some Kingsport fishermen heard about the catch and come up in sloops, but they were all lost. Nobody never seen 'em again. And just then our folks organized the Esoteric Order of Dagon, and bought Masonic Hall off a cavalry commander for it. Matt Elliott was a Mason, and against the selling, but he dropped out of sight just then. Remember, I'm not saying Obed was set on having things just like they were on that island. I don't think he aimed at first to do no mixing, nor raise no young'uns to take to the water and turn into fishes with eternal life. He wanted them gold things, and was willing to pay heavy, and I guess the others was satisfied for a while. Come in 46, the town doing some looking and thinking for itself. Too many folks missing, too much wild preaching at the meeting of a Sunday, too much talk about that reef. I guess I was done a bit by telling Selectman Mowry what I see from the cupola. There was a party one night as followed Obed's crowd out to the reef, and I heard shots between the dories. Next day, Obed and 32 others were in gaol, with everyone a-wondering just what was afoot and just what charge against them could be got to hold. God, if anybody'd look ahead, a couple of weeks later when nothing had been thrown into the sea for that long. Zadok was showing signs of fright and exhaustion, and I let him keep silence for a while, though glancing apprehensively at my watch. The tide had turned and was coming in now, and the sound of the waves seemed to arouse him. I was glad of that tide, for at high water the fishy smell might not be so bad. Again, I strained to catch his whispers. That awful night, I saw him. I was up in the cupola, hordes of them, swarms of them, all over the reef, and swimming up the harbor into the Manaxet. God, what happened in the streets of Innsmouth that night? They rattled our door, but Pa wouldn't open, and then he climbed out the kitchen window with his musket to find Selectman Maury and see what he could do. Mounds of the dead and the dying, shots and screams, shouting in Old Square and Town Square and New Church Green, jail thrown open, proclamation, treason, called it the plague when folks come in and found half our people missing. Nobody left but them. As I join in with Obed and them things, or else keep quiet. Nobody heard of my Pa no more. The old man was panting and perspiring profusely. His grip on my shoulder tightened. Everything cleaned up in the morning, but there was traces. Obed, he kind of takes charge and says things is going to be changed. Others will worship with us at meeting time. In certain houses, he's got to entertain guests. They wanted to mix like they did with the islanders, and he, for one, didn't feel bound to stop them. Far gone was Obed, just like a crazy man on the subject. He says they bring us fish and treasure and should have what they hankered after. Nothing was to be different on the outside, only we were to keep shy of strangers if we knew what was good for us. We all had to take the oath of the Dagon, and later on there were second and third oaths that some of us took. Them, as it helped special, would get special rewards, gold and such, no use bulking, for there was millions of them down there. They'd rather not start rising and wiping out humankind, but if they gave away and forced to, they could do a lot towards just that. We didn't have them old charms to cut 'em off, like folks in the South Sea did. Those islanders wouldn't never give away their secrets. Yield up enough sacrifices and savage knickknacks and harborage in the town when they wanted it, and they'd let well enough alone. Wouldn't bother no strangers as might bear tales outside. That is, without they got prying. All in the band of the faithful, order of Dagon, and the children should never die but go back to the mother Hydra and father Dagon, where we all came from once. Ya, Cthulhu Fatagan, Punglui, Muggle, Noth, Cthulhu, Relie, Wiga, Nagelfotogan. Old Zadok was fast lapsing into stark raving, and I held my breath. Poor old soul, to what pitiful depths of hallucination had his liquor, plus his hatred of the decay, alienage, and disease around him, brought that fertile, imaginative brain? He began to moan now, and tears were coursing down his channeled cheeks into the depths of his beard. God, what I see since I was 15 years old. Mene, Tekel, Aparzan, the folks as was missing, and them as killed themselves. Them as told things in Arkham or Ipswich or such places, were all called crazy, like you're calling me right now, but God, what I've seen. They'd have killed me a long time ago for what I know, only I took the first and second oaths of Dagon with Obed, so was protected unless a jury of 'em proved I'd told things knowin' and deliberately. But I wouldn't take the third oath. I'd have died rather than take that. It got around Civil War time, when children born since 46 began to grow up. Some of them, that is. I was afraid, never did no prying after that awful night, and never seen one of them close to in all my life. That is, never no full-blooded one. I went to the war, and if I had any guts or sense, I'd have never come back, but settled away from here. But folks wrote me things weren't so bad. That, I suppose, was because government draftmen were in town after 63. After the war, it was just as bad again. People began to fall off, mills and shops shut down, shipping stopped and the harbor choked up, railroad give up, but they They never stopped swimming in and out of the river from that cursed reef of Satan, and more attic windows got boarded up, and more noises were heard in the houses that weren't supposed to have nobody in them. Folks outside have their stories about us. Suppose you've heard plenty on 'em, seeing what questions you asked. Stories about things they've seen now and then, and about that queer jewelry that still comes in from somewhere and ain't quite all melted up, but nothing ever gets definite. Nobody'll believe nothing. They call 'em gold-like things pirate loot, and allow the Innsmouth folks to have foreign blood or distempered or something. Besides, those they that live here shoo off as many strangers as they can and encourage the rest not to get very curious, especially around nighttime. Beasts balk at the critters, horses or mules, but when they got autos, that was all right. In 46, Captain Obed took a second wife that nobody in the town never saw. Some say he didn't want to, but was made to by them, as he called in, had 3 children by her, 2 as disappeared young, but 1 gal that looked like anybody else was educated in Europe. Obed finally got her married off by a trick to an Arkham feller, as didn't suspect anything. But nobody outside will have nothing to do with Innsmouth folks now. Barnabas Marsh, that runs the refinery now, is Obed's grandson by his first wife, son of Onesiphorus, his eldest son, but his mother was another of them, and wasn't ever seen outdoors. Right now, Barnabas is about changed. Can't shut his eyes no more, and is all out of shape. They say he still wears clothes, but he'll take to the water soon. Maybe he's tried it already. They do sometimes go down for little spells before they go for good. Ain't been seen about in public for nigh on 10 years. Don't know how his poor wife can feel. She came from Ipswich, and they nigh lynched Barnabas when he courted her 50-odd years ago. Obed, he died in 78, and all the next generation is gone now. The first wife's children dead, and the rest, God knows. The sound of the incoming tide was now very insistent, and little by little it seemed to change the old man's mood from maudlin tearfulness to watchful fear. He would pause now and then to renew those nervous glances over his shoulder, or out toward the reef, and despite the wild absurdity of his tale, I could not help beginning to share his vague apprehensiveness. Zadok now grew shriller, and seemed to be trying to whip up his courage with louder speech. "Hey, you, why don't you say something? How do you like to be living in a town like this, with everything rotting and dying, and boarded-up monsters crawling and bleeding and barking and hopping around, black cellars and attics every way you turn? Hey, how do you like to hear the howling night after night from the churches and order of Dagon Hall, and know what's doing part of the howling? How'd you like to hear what comes from that awful reef every May Eve and Hallowmass, hey? Think the old man's crazy, eh? Well, sir, let me tell you, that ain't the worst." Zadok was really screaming now, and the mad frenzy of his voice disturbed me more than I cared to own. "Curse you, don't you sit there staring at me with those eyes. I tell Obed Marsh he's in hell, and he's got to stay there. In hell, I said. Can't get me. I ain't done nothing, nor told nobody nothing. Oh, you young fellow. Well, even if I hadn't told nobody nothing yet, I'm going to now. You just sit still and listen to me, boy. This is what I haven't ever told anybody. I say I didn't do prying later after that night, but I found things out just the same. You want to know what the real horror is? It's this. It ain't what those fish devils have done, but what they're going to do. They're bringing things up out of the water, off where they come from into the town. Been doing it for years, and slacking up lately. Those houses north of the river betwixt Water and Main Street is full of 'em, them devils, and what they bring in, and what they get ready. I say when they get ready, ever hear of a shoggoth? Hey, do you hear me? I tell you, I know what them things be. I seen them one night when... The hideous suddenness and inhuman frightfulness of the old man's shriek almost made me faint. His eyes, looking past me toward the malodorous sea, were positively starting from his head, while his face was a mask of fear worthy of Greek tragedy. His bony claw dug monstrously into my shoulder, and he made no motion as I turned my head to look at whatever he had glimpsed. There was nothing that I could see. Only the incoming tide, with perhaps one set of ripples more local than the long-flung line of breakers. But now Zadok was shaking me, and I turned back to watch the melting of that fear-frozen face into a chaos of twitching eyelids and mumbling gums. Presently his voice came back, albeit as a trembling whisper. "Get out of here. Get out of here. They've seen us. Get out for your life. Don't wait for nothing. They know now. Run for it quick out of this town. Yet another heavy wave dashed against the looming masonry of the bygone wharf and changed the mad ancient's whisper to another inhuman and blood-curdling scream. Before I could recover my scattered wits, he had relaxed his clutch on my shoulder and dashed wildly inward toward the street, reeling northward around the ruined warehouse wall. I glanced back at the sea, but there's nothing there. And when I reached Water Street and looked along it toward the north, there was no remaining trace of Zadok Allen. And that is the end of part 3. That was quite lengthy, and I will admit, if you do look at the actual paper copy of this is written all with an accent. I can't even describe it. And I did not pronounce half the thing. I didn't pronounce any of it. I basically translated it as best I could, because that was rough. And that was really interesting. I kind of liked this story. This definitely calls back to some of the stuff in the modern Cthulhu writings that I've read recently. But I really liked this part with seeing the depths that, like, greed and want and drive to do things that you probably shouldn't do, and where that kind of gets you. And you do see it being in sort of way brought upon Obed. It's brought upon himself. And how, you know, maybe it's best to have an unfeeling God that doesn't answer you sometimes. Because when they answer you, they generally want something. And I do kind of love that part of the Cthulhu mythos, where if you can contact it and it answers back, it's not a good thing. Even if it seems so in the moment. And I do find it interesting that so much of this is, like, almost I dove in unprepared because they only told me the good things. And it feels kind of like they were kind of tricking Obed to help them get further along. Although I feel like I should know what a Shoggoth is, and I cannot remember for the life of me. As we get deeper and deeper into the Cthulhu compendium. Thank you for reading along with me. Although, again, I really did stray a bit from the canon writing, mostly because I don't want to accidentally say anything extremely rude, and I'm also just cannot read that verbatim. Oh my goodness. That hurts my head, and I cannot do it. I'm sorry. Beyond that, I did chop off a lot of my hair recently, and it's been lovely. I do recommend getting stuff done. Again, I hung up a lot of stuff that's just been sitting on my desk waiting for me to do it, and that is why I was able to record today, because I kept barricading myself from doing things with them, and then instead of doing the things, I just didn't hang them up. I'm trying to work against myself, and sometimes it doesn't work. Beyond that, I hope you have a lovely rest of your week, and I will see you in the next one. Scholastically Natalie is out.